This week on the Played podcast.
Yeah, which is where literally it's all hell did break loose in the 12th century BC.
Is that
the tectonic
the year civilization collapsed or something like
yes.
that?
Yeah.
Yeah, like that, yeah.
I've seen the YouTube presentation from the author of the book. I haven't had a chance to tackle the book itself.
Well, the YouTube
It's a wonderful book.
Well, yeah, it's a great book. As he explains, the tectonic plates across the Mediterranean from west to east literally unzipped in the 50-year period.
Wow.
And as they unzipped, you got earthquakes, floods, volcanoes, tsunamis, ash clouds, climate change, famine, war, pestilence, death.
And not to mention those mysterious people, the sea peoples.
Right.
Our favorites. I have so many books on the sea peoples. One of them says they came from space. That's seriously, I have one from 1977. This guy who you look at his picture and you think, yeah, he would think that. But Chris and I have both read a lot of scholarly works that say this is where we think they came from. This is their evidence. Nobody's 100% certain, but a lot of people have kind of pegged it down to, these are real. These aren't one people. These are a lot of people. So it's a mass movement all across the Mediterranean. It's because it's been driven by everything, because the whole world's collapsing. It's like Mad Max with chariots.
Stay tuned for our interview with the creators of ancient civilizations of the Inner Sea.
Welcome to the Played podcast, where we explore cultivating connections through play.
Hello and welcome to the Played podcast. I'm your host, Laura.
And I'm Chris.
And we are here to explore cultivating connections through play. So last week, we gave our review of ancient civilizations of the Inner Sea. Over the Labor Day weekend, we had the privilege of speaking with the game designers Mark McLaughlin and Chris Vorder and game developer Fred Schachter, and we'll be presenting that interview in two parts so that we can keep this to a reasonable time. But first, we'd like to ask our listeners, if you are listening to us on Apple Podcasts or any podcatcher with a rate and review system, please rate and review us. It helps bump us up the rankings and helps new listeners find us. And however you're listening to us, please share on social media. Using that little share link thingy makes it a lot easier for new listeners to discover us.
Share link thingy, is that like the button or?
There's usually a thing that looks like it's got a bubble and another bubble connected by a kind of sideways V.
Oh, okay. I'll have to look for that the next time I'm on social media.
Yeah.
I don't know that I've ever seen those.
I'm fairly sure you have.
Oh, okay.
Anyways, very useful for being able to share episodes, create a link so that other people can discover and listen to us. So, Chris, is there anything you'd like to say before I cue up the interview?
No, not really.
Excellent.
I think the interview was great fun, and enjoyed being able to spend a little bit of time talking with Mark and Chris and Fred about gaming and about ACIS in particular, and particularly hearing some of their stories about the connections they've made with each other, with other people in the industry, and within their own families over their decades of playing games.
Yeah.
And it was very encouraging and inspiring and just a wonderful experience. I hope I get an opportunity to sit down and play at the same table with them one of these days, sooner rather than later. Indeed.
It was a fun conversation, and I hope that everyone else enjoys it. So, thank you, and without further ado, our interview with the creators of ACIS.
I want to welcome everybody to the call, and thank you for sharing some of your Labor Day with us. I'm Chris. My wife Laura is also here.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Hello, Laura.
So, for I guess to start, if each of you would just kind of briefly introduce yourselves so that we can introduce you to our listeners when we insert this into the podcast will publish on ACIS later this month, that might be a good place to start. Mark, do you mind leading off?
Actually, let's go with Fred because he's the oldest.
Oh, okay.
Oh, gee. Yes, I guess I am. And I might add, I just recently retired from a 50-plus year business career. But yes, my name is Fred Schachter. I am the game developer of Ancient Civilizations of the Inner Sea. And I have a partnership with Mark going back since the Napoleonic Wars, when we first met all those years ago at a Historicon convention in Pennsylvania. And from there, we've had a good partnership.
Yeah.
I'd like to make a kin that while Mark may be Grant, I'm his Sherman, or maybe he's Napoleon, I'm his Davout. In any event, I have been in the hobby since I was a teenager. I'm one of the founders of the venerable and I guess lamented by many SPI back in the days when I was a teenager doing a playtester.
Wow.
At the SP Works in the Village in New York City. And again, folks who are interested from this podcast can look up my biography and learn more about my past. I've been designing and developing games for many years, and I'm not going to take up people's time rattling up all the titles, but the ones, of course, I think germane to this podcast are the ones I've done with Mark and with Chris. And again, they go back to Napoleonic Wars version 2. From that, Mark and I did Kutuzov, Wellington, Rebel Raiders in the High Seas, Hitler's Reich, and now more recently with Chris's great help, we've just published the Ancient Civilizations of the Inner Sea. I've worked with other designers as well developing games. And I hope that is sufficient for an introduction to myself.
Yeah, thank you,
Chris
Fred.
Chris is next. He's senior to me.
Oh, gosh, Mark. Yes, my name is Chris Vorder, Bruegge, and this is the second game Mark and I have co-designed. The first one was back in the 80s, East Wind Rain. And I've been playing war games with my two brothers, one older, one younger, since I can remember. Started off with Little Green Army Men and played, I think Parker Brothers published the Civil War game in Life magazine, and we cut it out and played it. Tactics 2, Avalon Hill. But what led to this game was a professor I took at Georgetown, Professor Quigley's Development of Civilization. So it's been an interest of mine for a long time. Obviously played Avalon Hill Civilization, Britannia, History of the World, things like that. And then I read a book about 5 or 6 years ago called The History of the Inner Sea, and it was the history of the Mediterranean. And I found that fascinating, and that led to the development of the game. At one point, I developed it as far as I could and, got Mark involved because I didn't know what to do with it since. And so now we have it.
Thank you.
Okay, Mark, your turn.
Okay, well, I started playing board games when I was a little kid, and I remember that Parker Brothers game and all the Milton Bradleys. And then I was 13 years old, this guy in a Saturday morning class, it was military school, we had classes every morning. His essay is about a game called Waterloo. Well, that was it, Avalon Hill. And from then on,
Oh, wow.
And the first game I had published was War and Peace, which is being redone now. And it was by accident. I wound up my wife and I had gone on a honeymoon, had come back, and my company had folded while I was gone, and my wife had quit her job because they had done something to her. And so I was unemployed for a few months. So I was living in Maryland. I wrote to Avalon Hill, and I said, I just come up and see what you guys are doing up there, because I'm a big fan of your games. I get up there, and I'm just hanging around, talking to Greenwood and Shaw. And Tom Shaw invites me to lunch. So we go to the Holland House, down the street, having crab, wonderful Maryland crab, still remember. And halfway through the thing, Shaw says, so what's this game idea you want to pitch us? I didn't have one. I had no idea. Between the middle of the main course, dessert and coffee, I came up with and pitched and got signed War and Peace.
Wow.
Totally, purely right place, right time. And I get back home to my wife and I said, guess what? And War and Peace was my first paid design, and it literally paid the down payment on the first house my wife and I built.
Wow.
And Dickens Avenue. But I've been designing a game ever since, and Chris has been there every step of the way. He was a play tester and an advisor on every single game I ever did. I've had 20. This is my 23rd published title. Chris has been there for all 23 of them, especially when it comes to anything naval. If you take a piece of paper and put a dot with a pen on it, that's what I know about naval history. Chris knows the rest of the paper.
Wow.
And Chris and I both went to Georgetown. We both took Professor Quigley. The one he alludes to wrote a history of the world, 900 pages from the Big Bang to 1939 with one footnote, and that's the Bible because actually he wrote it. Chris came up with this beautiful idea for a game, and it just gelled. And because we're both old Avalon Hill Civ players, we're both computer games. I was a play tester on the very first Civilization with Sid Meier. So we've been, doing that thing forever. And we both paint and play miniatures. We're both big miniatures gamers.
Cool.
And both like a lot of ancient stuff. Yeah, I do Field of Glory, and right now I'm doing ADLG, it's called Art de la Guerre. I have 2,300 15mm ancient figures I painted myself. Chris has a massive as well. I mean, the two of us could redo the Peloponnesian Wars on a 1-to-1 scale. Which is also part of the thing about this game, is this game just plays to the stuff we read. Like I was talking to Mark Herman at GMT East 2 years ago, and we're throwing some quotes at each other from Herodotus and Thucydides, because he's got his Pericles game, I got this game. And which I paid Pericles this weekend, by the way. But anyway, I could not have done this game without Chris. We are co-designers from the first word to the last punctuation mark, and of course in between the punctuation marks that Fred put in. Because Fred is an amazing developer. I look at something and I look at what I think I said. Fred looks at it and says, "No, that's what it says." we're the Three Musketeers, and we're short of D'Artagnan, but I think I get to be Porthos.
Wow, I've got to say, I'm just thrilled to be talking with you guys, because I'm having a huge fanboy moment. As Mark and I discussed,
Fred, I might add your analogy of the Musketeers, Mark. Maybe our fourth is Chad Jensen, who really, really did a wonderful job in editing
beautiful.
The materials for the game.
Yeah, and Chad was sick while he was doing it. And since then, he's gotten much worse. Anybody who knows Chad Jensen or knows GMT knows what's going on. The guy is literally fighting for his life right now. And he has a wonderful, supportive, beautiful wife who's there every minute of the day for him. And we're all rooting for Chad. And, he's actually making progress, one small step every day. I'm hoping to get to work with him again in the future for the rest of the series of these.
Same here.
Here, yeah. So, okay. So who do you want to talk to next?
So, wow. And thanks for mentioning Chad. I knew he had been involved, but I wasn't sure how much because of the illness. And yeah, we're definitely, I've been following GMT's updates on that. So, definitely hoping things get better for him. Just a brief few words about us. Our podcast is focused on parents and encouraging parents to play games, especially board games and card games, with their kids. My wife and I are in our early 40s. We have 6 kids. We homeschool them.
6 kids?
6.
Woo! So are you Irish or Italian?
Which side?
Heinz 57 American. And so we use board games as a big part of our homeschooling. I was first introduced to Avalon Hill's Advanced Civ in middle school. We had a copy of it set up in the back of one of the classrooms. I was in a very experimental school in Philadelphia. And while we were going through reading adaptations of Homer and Herodotus and Thucydides and learning Greek and Roman history and reading through Canterbury Tales in the Middle Ages, we had advanced Civ as just this ongoing running game. And we'd play an hour or so after school, and then we'd play again on the weekends. And I played a lot of Civ, and from there it would just, I started getting into some of the SPI games and more of Avalon Hill's output. And I got involved with playing Dungeons and Dragons at about the same time. So right as I hit early adolescence, games all of a sudden appeared that in many ways you guys were deeply involved with. And I'm very grateful for all of those hours of enjoyment.
Yeah. And I'm sort of the primary educator here. And when we got married, he's like, I'm not sure how many bookshelves of games we actually have at this point, but by the time we were talking about, and when we have kids, we're going to homeschool, and I'm like, we're going to what? But as we got into it, he realized that he was taking those memories of playing Civ in middle school and saying, yes, you read books with the kids and you do worksheets when you need to, but this is how I learned history. I started here with falling in love with these places and watching this movement of things and becoming familiar with these maps. And that's why I cared about wanting to go deeper and learn more. And it wasn't just something that I read last month and immediately filed out of short-term memory when I needed to pass the next test.
So that's where we're coming from. And as a result, we have waited very impatiently for Ancient Civilizations of the Inner Sea to finally come out, and I've read through the developer diaries, and we are so impressed. We were actually showing it off to some friends of ours earlier today who are neighbors, and just the components and the clarity of the rule books are really, really impressive. So where we kind of wanted to start is what you've mentioned the class you had at Georgetown that kind of got things going. What about that encounter with the professor and the way he presented that early ancient world material inspired you guys?
Well, his if I could take the lead on that before Mark starts on launching on it.
Definitely.
He really taught me how to think. I mean, I knew how to memorize when I got to college, but he was a professor who taught me how to analyze and to think. And he covered a variety of basically civilization types, and he analyzes a civilization according to 6 levels, and you'll see those in the game in a variety of ways. At root is military for security. Then there's economic, political, social, intellectual, and religious. So you have those 6 levels that you analyze the civilization by. And our game, though, is almost at a higher, more generic level than that. One of the books he had us read right on was Ruth Benedict's, okay, I'm having a senior moment. But out of that book comes a definition of civilization, that is culture plus cities. And culture is nothing but shared patterns of beliefs, actions, rituals, and things like that. So,
excuse me, patterns of culture.
Yeah, patterns of culture. That's the name of the book. And anyway, so that's sort of what got me thinking about it. But of course, it's been too many years since I graduated, playing all these games and developing more information. And I just decided, having retired, that maybe I'll just go ahead and design this game. So I started it out, and then, as I said, I got to a certain point. I said, "Here, Mark, do something with it."
Yeah, I'll second about Quigley, because Carol Quigley used to teach an introductory course to 300 students in a full back room, and Quigley had taught all of the American Army officers who went overseas in World War II to take over the administration of conquered areas.
Oh, wow.
And he was advisor. He was advisor to Kennedy. But his period that he loved the most was the ancient world, and again, like Ruth Benedict's book, but but I still remember the lecture. I mean, Chris remember back. Franklin Delano Pericles. you remember that, Chris? You remember that?
Yeah.
I mean, so Quigley was an extremely opinionated professor. But in addition to the big 300 student course, I took him for 3 more courses. I used all my electives to take Quigley courses, seminars, etc. He did a magnificent one on the history of warfare that centered on the ancient era, and then Bolt went out from it. But literally half the class was Thucydides and Herodotus. The man was a brilliant ancient scholar, and he just, as a kid, I loved, Homer, and if there's a novel on Troy or a book on Troy, I still buy them and read them. Seriously, I have a shelf of nothing but Trojan War novels.
Now, a very knowing look.
I just read a book a couple months ago based on Briseis as the main character, which is the Trojan priestess that Achilles captures and Agamemnon steals. Mm-hmm. And that's the whole point. I read another novel from Patroclus' point of view. Just amazing. The war that killed the war that killed Achilles. Other books, all kinds of cool books. So Chris and I go way back in terms of that with Quigley, but also we played Avalon Hill Civilization. I have never beaten Chris in a game of Civ. We played with 2, 4, 6 guys, local group of guys. Mm-hmm. Chris always got that game, or as people used to say in our older days, they grokked it. Yep. He understood it. He figured it out. Me, as Fred will tell you, I'll play a game with Fred, and I won't play to win. I'll play to do something I want to do. Mm-hmm. And Fred will say, "That's stupid. You're going to lose the game." I said, "I don't care. I'm going to kill Wellington." Yeah.
You did kill Wellington.
Go ahead.
No, but that's your point. That was a game of Wellington we played while we were designing and developing it. And you're indeed correct, Mark. You had your heart set, and you turned your sights on killing Wellington himself. You did succeed, but you lost the rest of Spain.
but see, I didn't lose the game because I killed Wellington. I lost the game, but I did what I wanted to do, and Fred was up here last year. We were playing a game of Ancient Civilization, and Fred, he pissed me off. And he was Rome, I was Carthage, and he took Sardinia back from me. And I said, "I want Sardinia back." He says, "No, it's mine. Well, Don, we're going to turn on the leader." I said, "No, I want Sardinia back." And for the rest of the game, I fought for Sardinia. I didn't fight to win the game. I fought just to make sure I had freaking Sardinia.
And if I can butt in, that's actually one of the well springs of ACIS, and that is we wanted it to be a social game. Now, there's lots of interaction, and that's why the card play is really, we think, at the heart of the game. There are perhaps some people who don't care for that kind of game, but it makes the game. You just have the back and forth, and, well, you did that to me, and I did this to you, and, well, anyway, it's I guess some people say you shouldn't play it with your friends, but on the other hand, it depends upon what kind of friends you have, I suppose, right?
Yeah. Same can
Unlike
be diplomacy.
If you play diplomacy, you never play it with your friends because it breaks up friendships. I play diplomacy once a year at a convention with people I don't know. Mm-hmm. Whereas Junta, something like Junta, where the whole game is a backstab from the start out, it's us played. Then you just sit there and make funny jokes at each other. And Ancient Civilization is the same way. If you follow some of the threads on people, they keep saying this is a take that game. Take that, John, take that, Bob. And one guy's even called it ancient a-holes of the inner sea. But he meant it lovingly, and I have taken that as a compliment. And I said, if you think ancient a-holes of the inner sea is good, wait till you get to ancient a-holes of the Middle East. Which is our next game, which Fred has, already has. He's been playtesting it for 2 months. Oh, wow. Because Chris and I designed the next book in the series, which is a standalone game. It uses the same mechanics, but it's a different scale of the map. It's centered on the Fertile Crescent, the Nile Valley, and Anatolia, and it's got terrain as opposed to just areas. So you have mountain areas where if you control it, you get little stronghold cubes. You have the Fertile Crescent where even if you have a city, you still make people. And instead of wonders, okay, Chris, tell them what we've done instead of wonders of the world in ancient.
Well, instead of wonders, we've got deities. So you can build your favorite deity, and then you try to capture other people's deities, which is historically what they did, and drag their statues back to your own temple so that their gods can serve your gods. So deities have replaced the world wonders.
And we have 16 civilizations, one of them being Fred's people. And they have a Let My People Go card. And every one of the 110 cards on the next thing has an appropriate quote from the Bible.
Oh, wow.
I spent 2 weeks doing nothing really solid, nothing but looking up biblical quotes. Yeah.
Well, you only had to spend 2 weeks doing that because you hadn't read the Bible quite as often as you've read the Iliad, perhaps.
This is true. But I like the Old Testament because it's more, God 1.0 is kind of mean and nasty, but he's a much better read. And if you look at the stuff Chris came up with for the first one, this is his game. Chris was the driving force in this game, and a lot of it's centered on a book we both read about 1173 BC.
Well, that was the other book, 1177 BC or something like that.
Yeah, which is where literally it's all hell did break loose in the 12th century BC.
Is that the
tectonic
the year civilization collapsed or something like
that? Yes. Yeah.
Like that. Yeah.
I've seen the YouTube presentation from the author of the book. I haven't had a chance to tackle the book itself.
Well, the YouTube
it's a wonderful book.
Well, yeah, it's a great book because, as he explains, the tectonic plates across the Mediterranean from west to east literally unzipped in the 50-year period.
Wow.
And as they unzipped, you got earthquakes, floods, volcanoes, tsunamis, ash clouds, climate change, famine, war, pestilence, death.
And not to mention those mysterious people, the sea peoples.
Right.
Our favorites. I have so many books on the sea peoples. One of them says they came from space. That's seriously, I have one from 1977. This guy who you look at his picture and you think, yeah, he would think that. But Chris and I have both read a lot of scholarly works that say this is where we think they came from. This is their evidence. Nobody's 100% certain, but a lot of people have kind of pegged it down to, these are real. These aren't one people. These are a lot of people. So it's a mass movement all across the Mediterranean. It's because it's been driven by everything. Because the whole world's collapsing. It's like Mad Max with chariots.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and that's a chaotic situation that the players of the game have to cope with and contend with successfully. I know there are some people who relish that and enjoy it. Other people really dislike it, but that was the historical reality, as Chris and Mark just said. And to get back to the point you made about people not liking diplomacy, I have the playtest group here in Charlotte, where I live. They won't play diplomacy with each other because of the reasons I think you don't want to play diplomacy with your friends. This game, however, they are thoroughly enjoying. It is a take-back game. When I was in Arizona, Mark, at the CSW Expo, and Mark Herman was kind enough to join it along with some of the Billingsley's, and he loved it. He loved it. I think when Mark called it, he said, "This is the game with the greatest screwage factor," SCREWAGE, and he said his buddies in New York would really, really like it. And again, that's an element of the game that some people really, really like. Other people who want to have more control, I guess, find that objectionable, and they'll enjoy the game. So not all games are for everyone.
Right.
But I'll be honest, what Chris and Mark have done, they've done a game based upon their perceptions of the history, and it is what it is.
I have to say I was really impressed by the Sea Peoples Invade. I like all of the sort of invasion cards in the Fate deck. It really turns things on their head, and having that as
part of an element of play is one of the things that I really appreciate.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Chris can take credit for that in two ways, not only because of what they are, but Chris and I are old Civilization players. And and as you know from playing Civilization or Advanced Civilization, once somebody gets in the lead, it's almost impossible to stop them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, with this game, the guy who's in last place gets to play those. So when the four big nasty invasions come, the guy in last place decides where they go.
Yeah.
So if it says Southern Raiders, well, if he doesn't like the Egyptians or the Carthaginians or the Mauritanians, bam. Northern hordes, look out Rome, look out Gaul, look out Troy.
Mm-hmm.
And the sea peoples, of course, anywhere there's water, and half the map is water. It's okay, boys, hit the beach.
The other that leads into another topic. The other aspect of this, the Avalon Hills Civilization game, which was wonderful, was all the technology cards. I never played the advanced version of it, but I was frustrated because you could A, get yourself into a technology sinkhole,
Right.
and B, there were never enough cards for everyone.
Yep.
Yeah.
Now, my reading of ancient history is that, okay, a civilization would have an edge for a while, but, that while didn't last that very long when you think about civilizations.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why we don't have that kind of a technology tree. They're embedded in the cards to give a one-turn advantage to a civilization that uses a card, for example. That's our logic behind the lack of a technology tree, and the reality of a technological edge didn't last that long.
That's a really great mechanic too, and it helps provoke a discussion of that aspect of history. So
yeah, like I throw a chariots. I see your chariots, and I'll top it with armored infantry. Oh, I got siege weapons. I got a general. I got a traitor. You're all dead. The other thing is that Chris, if you remember, Chris and I both said we're civilization gamers, both the board game and the computer games.
mm-hmm.
And often Chris and I will sit down at the same time on the computer and we'll share control of one nation, just because it's kind of fun. Every one of the civilizations is different. They each have a character. If you would think of it as a Dungeons and Dragons, well, you've got your bards, you've got your fighters, you've got your priests, you've got your traders, you've got your magicians, and each of these civilizations, like the Carthaginians, they have three special things. They get to put one extra disc out in any one naval battle, because that's their fleet. They get one extra disc in any one land battle. Think of that as elephants or Hannibal or Hamilcar, and they get one extra disc if you attack Carthage. It's the famous walls of Carthage. The same with the Trojans. As long as the Trojans have a city in Troy, you can't really take the place, by card play. You've got to go out there and kill the guys and lay siege for 10 years and build a big wooden horse. If my favorite, I think one of my favorites was Chris came up. Chris worked. I say he knows more about naval than I. I mean, I know a lot about naval, but nothing compared to him. He came up with the idea of making two naval powers, the Minoans and the Phoenicians. And I'll let Chris talk about that.
Well, Minoa was one of my favorite civilizations it was one of Quigley's too. So that was always a favorite. So we had to have Minoa in there, and their strength was theoretically their navy, though no one's really quite sure what it looked like or how it operated. And on the other hand, the Phoenicians were the traders. After all, they were the founders of Carthage in a way. And so they both had to have naval capabilities, but they're slightly different. Minoa gets victory points for having control of sea zones. Phoenicia gets them for just being there. And it's the trading aspect of the Phoenicians. Also, I think, Mark, you may have had the idea, give the Phoenicians the alphabet. Yeah. And that allows them to draw an extra card each turn, or something like that. So,
they get to draw two cards and can pick. They get to draw two bonus cards and pick one, because of the alphabet. But also, if you think of it, I always think of the Phoenicians kind of like the Bene Gesserit from Dune. They just show up and hang out, and they get points for being there. Whereas the Minoans are like, that's a Myci. And
now,
I'm like, the Minoans, unlike most of the game, in competition, we don't call it war, we call it competition because it's a whole bunch of things besides just combat. Oh, well, hell, it's a war game. It's a battle. But it's still competition in many other ways. The Minoans are one, you can share, if everybody has one disc in an area, you're all happy, gentle, sweet, and loving, and kissing each other, and trading, and giving each other flowers. As soon as the second guy shows up there, he murders the rest. And the Minoans are one of the only civilizations that can actually start a war, even after everything else looks peaceful. It's just like everything's peaceful, everything's on the table. You get the competition phase, no one say, nah, we're starting a war. And the Minoan Navy shows up and sinks everybody else. It's like the Bismarck walking into a gaggle of ducks. And the Romans are the same way in the fourth epic. There's 4 epics in the game. The Romans start out as a republic, so most of their extra military stuff is defensive. But if they go to the fourth epic, they get to do the same that on land. And everybody else is a mix of things. Some have usually like the Egyptians. Well, they have the fertile valleys. They grow people. The Celts, have some people, but they also have the mines. The Mauritanians, they get trades from the salt mines, so they get their light cavalry. The Trojans have the walls. The Mycenaeans, well, the Mycenaeans, they get no benefits in anything peaceful. They get benefits in military, and they get double benefits when they loot places because that's Agamemnon.
The Homeric hero's ability. That's really cool.
Yeah. And then the wealthy warriors of Gaul.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's not when the Gauls go into battle, they get more people because hey, it's a war, everybody comes. But yeah, and then and like I said, now for the next game, the Middle East, and we've got 16 civilizations. We've got Hittites, we got the Mitanni, we got Dravidians, which are out in India. We got the Sumerians and the Scythians coming from the north. We've got the sea peoples again. Hello, we have these. We have the people of Israel for one epic they can start in. We have the Syrians, which are basically the Nazis of the ancient world. Well, they are. If you read, I got another shelf just of Assyrian history. You read what the guys. This is like Chris was saying about we'll take your god and we'll bring him home. Mm-hmm. The kings of Assyria, they have steles, which are big like stone blocks all over the Middle East saying, I came here, I tore their city down, I spit their children on pikes, I took their gods home and laid them in and these are guys who would, after a battle, they'd say to the guys, okay, I want you to cut off their 21st digit. Not the 5 on the left hand, not the 5 on the right hand, not the 5 on the right foot, not the 5 on the left foot, that one other one.
Yeah.
And we'll bring them home. Wow. As a collection. And then we'll wear them. Wow. The whole thing about, the Conan thing about, lamentation of your enemies. That's the Assyrians. And Chris has come up with a cool thing in the next game for those guys. The thing about the captives, Chris?
Yeah, one of the historical factors in the Middle East was a shortage of labor all the time. And I think we have it that you can choose to take growth tiles instead of loot, but the Assyrians have to take growth tiles as captives. So that's just a historical trend that they were always looking for people because, of course, they had to build cities and they need slaves to do that. So anyway, it's kind of a historical factor throughout the Middle East. There was a shortage of labor. So anyway.
Yes, as you say, Chris and I are still reading books on this. We haven't stopped. And Chris is...
Well, there's no end to them.
There's no end to them. Yeah, thank God. Or thank Homer. And then Chris also has sort of started thinking about the next 2 in the series. We're thinking of doing 4. Chris, you want to say something about that?
Well, I started reading Ancient Civilizations of the Far East and haven't quite figured out if we're going to make it Ancient Civilizations of China or include Korea, Japan, Southeast Asia, and Central Asia. That still remains to be seen. It goes back to a game that, I don't know, Mark, you must have played too, Emperor of China.
It's still on my desk. It's still on my shelf.
Yeah. It's a real social game. It's not a serious, strategy game per se, but it's just a hell of a lot of fun, actually. And so that's sort of, the mandate of heaven ends the game. And so I haven't quite figured out how this game should go in that regards. There's so many different factors to consider, but I'm thinking about it. Then the other game is, go ahead.
Go ahead. Let me go.
Then there's Ancient Civilizations of the New World, which would be, the tribes throughout North and South America. And in this game, the invaders won't necessarily be black tiles, but they're going to be the Europeans coming in. And we'll see how that plays out. But that's just a concept. Don't know where that's going to go.
Now, speaking to those two, the ancient civilizations of the Far East, I had said to my daughter, I think I'm going to get ancient civilizations of the Orient, and she got an all PC on me.
Yeah.
She says, no, they're not Orientals anymore. I said, no, they're Asians or something else. And then I started talking I have a very good friend who's an elder in the Mormon Church here in this part of the state. A great guy, Bill Greenwell. We play games. I play with him, Saturday. And I told him about the one about the Americas. He says, "Well, would you have the so and so in there?" I said, "Who are they?" He says, "The ancient peoples that are in the Book of Mormon, because according to the Book of Mormon, in the BC era, there were these other great empires up in the Midwest." And we're not talking about the Mound people. We're talking about some other names that sound like something out of L. Ron Hubbard. But, I said to him, what? I'll tell you what. If you give me the information, I will work up a scenario in the back of the playbook that says a what-if scenario, like this is this is a Book of Mormon scenario from their book. And I may be the only person in history who's ever done has a war game with the Mormons in it.
Cool.
And but you know what? Why not? Who knows? I mean, the Hittites were a lost civilization for 2,000 years. They thought they were a rumor, and all of a sudden they found stuff. Who knows?
Well, that was true also. That was true also for the Sumerians. I mean, we really only learned about the Sumerians not all that long ago. In the 20th century, really. So,
and Troy itself, for that matter, until Schliemann went and dug it up where Homer said it was.
Have to fight in the process.
Well, Schliemann was the P.T. Barnum of his day. He knew he was a showman, and like when he dressed up his wife in the gold and said, "This is Helen's crown," he knew what he was doing. Although every archaeologist since hates the man. Because of the way he did things, he just like bulldozes, not with a bulldozer, but just went through stuff, with willy-nilly, as opposed to a systematic thing. Like if you look at Michael Wood's, his book and his movie, In the Footsteps of the Trojan War, and in the Footsteps of Alexander, you look at you see the richness of that, and that's 30 years ago, and since then, so much more has come to light.
Mm-hmm.
So who knows? Who knows what's out there? But they won't be a main civilization. They'll be a scenario thing like that.
Cool.
And Chris, by the way, yesterday sent me the starting work on the expansion set for Ancient Civilizations of the Inner Sea. I'll let Chris tell you about that.
Well, it's when we originally designed ACIS, we actually had it going to about 1500 AD, or current era, if you will.
Okay.
And we then scaled it back to 500 AD, which would basically be the fall of Rome. So this add-on module, I don't know how it's going to work out, will cover from about 500 AD to about 1500 AD. And it covers basically from the Arab Jihad to basically the expulsion of the Moors from Spain. So you have the Arab Jihad for the first epic of 4 turns, covers 500 to 1000 AD. And then from 1000 AD to 1500 AD, you have what you might call the Crusade or the Christendom counterattack. Of course, during that time, Constantinople falls. So, I mean, it works both ways. But we're working on it.
It's going to be one of 3 things. The most ambitious, and which we hope, and Billingsley's open to this, is to actually make an expansion module where there would be different civilization cards to replace at least some of those in the deck.
I figured out we need to replace probably at least 25 of them.
Yeah, I mean, you don't want biblical stuff happening in 1000 AD. You don't want chariots showing up in the Crusades.
Right.
It would swap those out. and also allow us to put some other things in there, and would have civilization cards for the Arabs, for the Byzantines, for the Spanish, etc., the Venetians. That's the dream. The next step down, if it would be, and I've already talked to Roger McGowan about this, is doing it as something for his magazine, C3I, where we'd have more limited components. But that's also a possibility. And worst comes to worst, we'll just do it as an article. But Gene Billingsley has been very supportive of this thing from the first moment he saw it, because he said, GMT has a great reputation among the hardcore war gamers. Mm-hmm. But he also is a businessman, and he's a family man, and he does all kinds of gamers. So he has worked very hard, as the rest of the guys at GMT, to branch out into some crossover games, whether it's Dominant Species, whether it's Thunder Alley, whether it's a whole bunch of them, right? And he sees this as a way to branch out, to reach other people. And like one of the guys who are one of our lead playtesters is a guy. He's from Finland. He's a professor at a German university. And he and his group of guys, half of them are war gamers and half of them are Euro gamers, especially the ones who have wives. Yes, gamers do have wives. And he says it's very different because that group will play it as a Euro game where they're just playing to work to build things up among themselves. The bad cards come in, sure, they throw them around, but they mostly do what was it clearly called, an intensive expansion?
Intensification, yeah.
Yeah, where you build up, whereas wargamers, they build out, Mm-hmm. And so it's a game that you can play either way. You don't have to fight this as a war game to win it. There's going to be competitions going on, some you can't avoid, but you don't have to go bash each other if you don't want to. Or you can do nothing but, go to war. Or some combination therein. There have been games where I've seen one guy sit in the corner and just build. Other two guys, like say Fred and I, that game, just bash. And anybody can win it that way. But yeah, we have. I've had 23 games published, and of all the games I've done, I'm proud of every single one of them. There's no game I'm prouder of than this. Seriously, I have had more fun. More fun designing it, more fun researching it, more fun working with Chris and Fred than I have on any game, more fun showing it off than any game I've ever done in 40 years of design. And because my first game came out in 79, this is 40 years later.
I think that's a pretty natural stopping point for this week. We'll present the conclusion next week and hopefully have some play reports by then as well.
So, until then, we hope you enjoyed listening to today's interview. If there are any questions that you have, you may get them answered on next week's segment. But if there's things even after then that you would like to hear about, or if there are other game designers you'd like for us to contact and see if we can get an interview with, please write to us at playedpod@gmail.com. You can also find us and follow us on Instagram and Twitter at PlayEdPod. Please tell us your thoughts, and until next time, thanks for listening.
Take care. Bye.
Again, from the top.
Once more, with feeling.
This has got to be the most restarts we've ever done.
Same thing, only better.
Faster and more intense.
Slower and more languid. Do you want a separate track? Or
nope.
You just want to
slice
cut. And dice it later? Okay.
Yep. I am an editor. So...